Good evening, everybody, and Happy New Year. If you haven't been following my 7-day Christmas recovery last week, then Happy New Year, and thank you for joining my live, my first Principles of Good Health live of 2022. So this is my first in my regular series. For those of you who don't know, I try and go live every single Tuesday at 6 p.m. to give you a different topic every week. I'm always on the lookout for new topics, so please give me an idea of the sorts of things you might be interested in. And so here we are, 2022, second week of January, and this is a time of year typically when people are thinking of dry January. It's a typical month in the year when people might think of giving up alcohol. You might be trying to cut back. You might have cut out a long time ago. And well done if you have. It's not easy. It's not easy navigating the social scene. It can be quite tricky, I know. So well done if you've got this far and you stuck with it, because that's just brilliant. But what you may not have banked on is the fact that you are now reaching for different sorts of foods. And you may just think this is just a way of compensating. You know, you're drinking alcohol and you're just trying to find something else for the calories or for something else to do. But there are other reasons why you may find that you are wanting to consume sugary foods, or it could actually be starchy foods. And there are some specific reasons why this might be the case. And I just wanted to explain, first of all, why that's the case, because that understanding is always so helpful for you. Once you understand it, I'm going to come up with some ideas and ways for you to try and overcome having those sugar cravings, because I'm sure for many of you, if this is the case, the last thing you want to do is compensate the alcohol intake and the excess calories that can come from drinking the alcohol and just replace it for something else that's just not that great for you, and can certainly pile on the weight, and certainly pile on the weight around your abdomen, which is not what we want to do. So let me give you a little bit of background. What is it that causes these sugar cravings? Well, there can be two specific main reasons why this is the case. When you drink alcohol, it can drive the dopamine pathways. This is a neurotransmitter from the brain that makes us feel good. So this neurotransmitter that is released as a result of drinking alcohol, dopamine, it makes us feel calm, it can make us feel relaxed, and it can make us feel good. It can be one of the reasons, and I'm not going to go into any psychological reasons as to what drives addiction. That's not my area of expertise, but it is considered to be one of the areas that can be linked to this addiction, this dopamine, and always wanting to drive and get more dopamine from the body. So and that can be what can perpetuate it, because people have this need, and there can be various reasons why, as to why we need more dopamine. So if you've gone through a spell of, maybe it's just Christmas time or longer, where you've been drinking quite a lot of alcohol, and then you're going to this phase of dry January, you may be losing that dopamine hit, and your body will do anything it possibly can to get that dopamine hit from somewhere else. And sugar can create that dopamine pathway. So, it's going to get that hit from somewhere else. And that can be one of the reasons for switching the alcohol for the sugar. It's trying to drive that dopamine pathway. The other link here is with regards to the sugar itself. Now, I talk a lot in this page and in my blogs, and when I'm with clients, I talk a lot about balancing blood sugar. This is an absolute sort of bedrock of what I talk about, really, other than my gut health expertise, but is trying to keep our blood sugar levels stable. Now, what happens is when we drink alcohol, it can be quite sugary. It can really spike our blood sugar levels. That can rise high, it can come crashing down. You may then get a hit from somewhere else. But over time, what might be happening now is that the body is really struggling to stabilize its blood glucose levels, the blood sugar levels, and it's really important that the body tries to do this. So it might be looking for sugary foods or starchy foods to try and get that sugary hit from elsewhere. Of course, the starchy foods are your breads, your pasta, your rice, your crackers. It could be potatoes and parsnips. So starchy foods, even bananas. There's a lot of sugar. Starch is sugar. And so the body can very, very quickly, from starchy foods or indeed from sugary foods when you eat them, it very rapidly sends a lot of sugar into the bloodstream. The consequence of that, though, is that the blood sugar levels is rapidly spiked quite high when you eat a lot of those foods, and it can then come plummeting down quite quickly. This is all through the action of insulin. We need insulin in the body. Insulin is actually needed to actually drive glucose into our cells to create energy, so it's needed for good reason. But the more glucose there is in the bloodstream, the more insulin the body is going to release in order to take that glucose out of the bloodstream to try and drive it into our cells. But what can happen is too much insulin is released, it takes too much glucose out of the bloodstream, and then it can fall quite low. And then we get into, this perpetual cycle of wanting to seek more sugary foods, more starchy foods. It could be one of the reasons why it's very hard for people to sort of stay off the alcohol, that dopamine hit again. And you can get into this vicious cycle. For some people, though, this sort of balancing blood sugar, when it gets out of balance and it goes high and then it gets low, and the action of insulin is actually driving the storage of fat, because if there's too much glucose in the bloodstream, it's not all going to be taken up into the cells, because there's a limit as to how much energy requirements the cells actually need. The body will try and store it. It will try and store it as glycogen in the liver. Some of it is stored in your muscles as glycogen for when we need that urgent need for energy in our muscles. But a lot of it, if it's not needed in the liver, it's not needed by the cells, the body will convert it to fat. And the reason why it does that is it's because it's got to park it somewhere. The body will always try and maintain homeostasis, and from blood sugar, it needs to keep it in a certain level of balance. So it's going to need to put the sugar, excess sugar, somewhere, and it will convert it via the liver and convert it into fat. Another aspect from the alcohol with blood sugar is alcohol does affect the liver. And one thing I found is that I know that the liver is a key organ for blood sugar regulation, just as I've explained just now. Either we take excess glucose and we store it in the liver as glycogen for that instant conversion back to glucose when blood sugar levels drop too low. But the liver also has a very important role for being able to release glucose from proteins. Our body's very clever at being able to create energy from different macronutrients. So sometimes it will actually be able to create glucose from protein foods. And this is impaired when we drink alcohol, and it can send our blood glucose levels too low. It's one of the reasons why after a night of heavy drinking, we are possibly seeking starchy foods to try and get our blood glucose back up again, because it can be harder. The liver may have a sort of an impaired ability to release sugars back into the bloodstream again. So blood sugar regulation is fundamentally important for enabling to come off the alcohol, stay off the alcohol, but not just go for the sugary foods. And you may say, well, Caroline, blood sugar regulation, she'll only need the sugars to create that. But what I'm going to explain to you now is that's just not the case at all. If you bear in mind that the body's always going to do whatever it can to keep homeostasis, blood sugar regulation in balance, then you don't need to worry about eating sugary or starchy foods to keep glucose, because your body will be able to create glucose from other sources. So first and foremost, what can we do? It's time for a rethink. We need to go back to basics. We need to go back to basics, thinking about what is on the plate. So one thing that you can do, first of all, is to spend a bit of time and a bit of awareness about what you're eating. Keep an honest food diary. And this isn't just about your total food intake. You need to break it down into each meal and each snack. Think about what is on your plate, and I'll explain how to think about that in terms of different macronutrients in a moment, but also think about what you're drinking. You know, are your drinks sugary? Are you adding sugars to your drinks? Are you adding artificial sweeteners to your drinks? This can play real havoc with blood sugar regulation for reasons I cannot go into here today, but it really messes with the brain's ability to understand what's going on. So thinking about the meals, we need to stop and think about each meal. What is going onto your plate? We need to think about the proteins first of all. And those proteins are your meats, fish, shellfish, eggs, pulses, lentils, nuts and seeds, tofu, corn, if that's what you're eating. All of those are protein sources. Take a moment to think how much of that is actually on your plate. The second sort of macronutrients is to think about the fats. We need fats in our diet. Some fats may be considered to be better than others, but your fats are going to come from saturated fats. There might be a bit in your meat, your oily fish, salmon, mackerel, sardines, herrings, fresh tuna, a little bit in trout. Yes, they're protein foods, but they also create and contain some important, very important fats. Nuts and seeds, again, they're a protein source, but they also contain very good fats. Olive oil, coconut oil, avocados, those are our main fat sources. So are any of those part and parcel of your plate? The starchy ones I've mentioned, rice, pasta, potatoes, swede, parsnips. If it's a snack, it would be the banana. Crackers, all of those are your starchy ones. The bread, of course, they're starchy grains or starchy carbohydrates in terms of the root vegetables. Very, very starchy. How much of that is on your plate? And then separately, they are also carbohydrates, but they're not the starchy ones. So those are all your vegetables, above ground vegetables. You can include carrots in that as well. All of your above ground vegetables and your salad vegetables as well. So take a moment to think about that. Go away and write it. Look at your plate. Think about what proportion each of those macronutrients is on your plate. I haven't mentioned fruit, but think about where fruit sits in your diet. Are you topping up your meals and your snacks with a lot of fruit? Because fruit is and can be extremely sugary. I've mentioned bananas are starchy, they're very sugary, but so are grapes, tropical fruits like mango, pineapple, dried fruit is really sugary. And if you're having drinks like fruit juice or smoothies that contain a lot of sugar, smoothies that contain a lot of fruit, it contains a lot of sugar. So be very, very wary about fruit. And I always keep fruit to one side when I'm talking about that. You have to be very, very careful in the amount of fruit. So first and foremost, we can keep the upper hand of keeping our blood sugar level stable by rebalancing your plate. You need to look at what was originally on your plate, and now you need to think about how you rebalance it. So protein and fats as a combined segment should be about a third of your meal, a third of your plate. So the reason for this is not only do the proteins and fats fill you up, they keep you full for quite a long period of time, which is really important if you're trying to cut down on snacks in between meals, which again can play havoc with keeping blood sugar levels stable. But the protein and fat content of the meal slows the speed. They take longer to digest, and therefore they slow the speed with which the starchy carbohydrate content of that meal, those potatoes and rice and pastas and breads, it slows the speed with which the carbohydrates are broken down into simple sugars like glucose, and slows the speed with which the glucose, the simple sugars, get passed into the bloodstream. And what we're trying to create here is a drip feed of glucose going into the bloodstream. When that happens, you get a steady release of glucose going into the bloodstream, and instead of your glucose levels spiking really high, it keeps it on an even keel. Now, if you had no starchy carbohydrates on your plate at all and no fruit, you don't need to worry about, oh my God, I need to have the sugar going into my bloodstream, because remember what I said at the start, or just to remind you, your body has a source of glucose that it can always fall back on, glycogen stores, or proteins that it can convert into glucose, or fats that it can convert and use for energy sources in the body, because the glucose is an energy source. It goes to our cells, to the mitochondria to create energy. That's all it's doing, really. It's creating an energy source in the body. We don't need it for an energy fuel source. We can get it from elsewhere. Now, I'm not saying you've got to give up all your starchy carbohydrates. What I want to show you is that you can stop this perpetuation of yo-yoing blood sugar levels by changing the balance of your meals, having a really small proportion of starchy carbohydrates on your plate, say 20%, that's all you need really. A third of it as proteins, and the rest of your meal, ideally half a plate of vegetables, the non-root vegetables, not potatoes, not parsnips going into that section, but all your above ground vegetables, lots of colour and lots of variety. Your cauliflowers, your kale, your broccoli, your mushrooms, peppers, courgettes, green beans, beetroot, cucumber, tomatoes, all of these sorts of things are the ones that should be forming the other section of the plate. They are carbohydrates. They do actually convert into glucose, as well as delivering lots of fibre and lots of nutritional vitamins and minerals into the body. But because of the fibre content, their glucose release is that much slower. So when you start to eat in that way, you're going to stop this rise and fall of glucose levels, keep it on a really even keel. And this helps to just really calm the body, calm the mind, keep stress under control, and actually helps you to overcome sugar cravings, because you're not getting that high and then the low. You've got this constant need of glucose in the bloodstream without it having to seek out new sources of glucose from elsewhere. It's just going to keep it on an even keel. You start to learn very quickly that you're doing things right because you actually feel better in yourself. You should feel calmer. You should feel in control of your mood. You should feel less tired. You know, you should just feel like you're on a more even keel. Now, when I mentioned about the vegetables and I said half your plate, if you're nowhere near that, don't go rushing into doing this all in one go, because your poor old gut is in for a shock. If you're not eating huge quantities of vegetables, do increase them slowly. You can increase the protein more quickly, but don't increase the vegetables too rapidly. You do want to get to that point of half a plate if you can, but don't do it too quickly. Breakfast, of course, you're not likely to be eating stacks of vegetables unless your breakfast is more of a cooked one. You might be eating eggs and mushrooms and spinach and tomatoes. And that way you are getting a lot of vegetables alongside protein. You know, a cooked breakfast is a great breakfast to have. People often think it's not. It actually really is a good breakfast to start the day. So there are lots of ways to get more vegetables in your diet over the course of the day. Now, I did mention earlier on about snacks, and when we keep our blood sugar levels more stable, there's less desire to have snacks. That is really the next thing you might want to move on to, is when we get more protein in, which keeps us fuller for longer, this satiety, this feeling of fullness. You shouldn't have a desire to be constantly grazing throughout the day. That grazing, and it does encourage the release of insulin that can contribute to yo-yoing blood sugar levels. So, you know, the first thing is to get the plate, this healthy plate, as I call it, this balance throughout that first and foremost. And later on, you may find that you want to address the snacks that you're having, and you may find you actually don't need to have the snacks. The drinks you do need to look at. I started off by saying look at the sugar levels, but the caffeinated drinks, because they act as a stimulant, and in turn stimulants can create a release of glucose into the bloodstream, you do want to look at the amount of caffeine that you're having throughout the day and look at ways of reducing that. Reduce it, look at more hydrating fluids, look at your herbal teas, your fruit teas, your rhubarb teas, and just having more water throughout the day as well. It doesn't actually take that long for the body to readjust to this way of eating. It is actually much easier than you think. It is about getting organized and first and foremost going away and looking what you've got on the plate. And once you understand about the protein sources and the fats and what are starchy carbohydrates and what are vegetables and which vegetables you should be eating, then you can slowly to readjust your plate ratios and get things into a much better balance overall. And this should enable those of you who are looking, this goes beyond just the alcohol, but if the sugary foods are a problem at this time of year, this is one way to ease yourself back into eating in a much balanced way and help you get off those sugary cravings. So I hope you found that helpful. This will be recorded. All of my lives go into my YouTube channel. Please come over and subscribe. My YouTube channel is called Peyton Principles Natural Health. That's Peyton, Peyton Principles Natural Health. Please come and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Then you'll get notification of all my new lives. And I'll be back next Tuesday. Drop me a message or put it anytime. Come into my group and say what other topics you'd like me to talk about. But I'll be back next Tuesday at 6 o'clock for my next live. Have a great week, everyone. Thanks for watching. Bye.